gonna count down from 5, and then we're gonna click on live stream button. Okay, thanks everyone. If you're not speaking, can you please mute, and we serve the space for the speaker. Awesome. So let's get started. I'm gonna count from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Viet.UX-PM Webinar. My name is Sunny, and speaking with me today, it's my honor to welcome Ms. Ha Phan from Pluralsight. She is a PM Director at Pluralsight. We're gonna get to her in a moment, but I'm really glad to welcome you back today on a beautiful Sunday here in California. And I know that you are dialing from all over the world, so thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And for those who are new about Viet.UX-PM, Viet.UX-PM is really a global community for Vietnamese people to thrive and help each other in user experience and product management career. So we organize webinar every month and welcome the speakers of all different backgrounds with sharing with us their expertise and their experience. So very honored to have the speaker joining us. So today, before we started, I would like to introduce to you how we are going to work with each other in the next 1.5 hours. So we're gonna have the speaker present her knowledge and sharing in about 30 to 45 minutes. And then the rest of the time for the second part, we will interact with her. And this is a chance for you to ask questions and also interact with this speaker and also share your experience if you would like to. And we would really appreciate your feedback, your questions, whatever you feel comfortable sharing or not really sure how to answer those questions. Please go ahead and interact with us. We have Zoom today, and if you are in Zoom, please go ahead and chat, or later on you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly. It's another way to interact with this event is if you are watching the live stream on YouTube, you can also go ahead and chat on YouTube, and we also monitor the YouTube chat and we make sure that your questions can be answered. So we're gonna have a website called Slido.com. Sorry, let me repeat that. Slido. And you can go ahead and go into your browser and type sli.do. Let me repeat that, sli.do, and put the event code 87373. 87373. So if you are in there, there are 2 tabs. The first one is to ask questions, and the second one is to answer the poll. Now you might see the poll is not ready yet, but we will kick off in a moment. So let's go ahead and type sli.do, and the event code is 87373. Okay. Now, once you are with us, very welcome you from all different backgrounds, and we're very curious to know your current role. So if you can see the first questions in the pool already pop up, and go ahead and tell us what's your role. Are you a product manager? Are you a marketing manager, or are you working in sales? Are you a student? Are you a UX designer? Please go ahead and let us know what's your current role and position so that we know it better. Awesome. I start seeing some of the answers already, and thank you. Please go ahead. We have student, we have product managers for sure. We have business development. Awesome. We have engineering lead. Awesome. Thank you, guys. We also have student. We have UX and UI designer. Many UX designer and developer here. Awesome. We have graduate student. Great. Software engineer. They prepare very early, right? I didn't know that that's something called product manager when I was a student. Product operations, awesome. Aspiring product manager, here we are. This is exactly where we want to see you. Okay, while you are answering the question, first of all, thank you so much for participating. This is, I hope it's going to be a good practice for you how to participate later on. And we will have some questions from the speakers. So please don't close the Slido window, and please go ahead and keep that throughout the event. All right, I have seen the same pattern over and over. Great, awesome. So I think we have a good spectrum of everyone from, student, engineer, product operations, product manager, and of course, there's a lot of people working on design. Awesome, thank you guys so much. Let's go back to the event, and without further ado, I would like to introduce you our honored guest speaker today. She is a very special person that I know personally. Ms. Ha has many years of experience working as a UX designer and as well as PM or product director. Currently, she is a product director at Pluralsight, and she lead the team working on search, browse, recommendations, and navigation. Prior to that, she spent her career working as UX designer and information architect. And she has the previous role she has was a principal UX designer at GoPro. And if you are like me, whoever really love taking photos and going on adventures, I'm sure that you know GoPro, which is one of the very famous brands here in the US and also in the world. Awesome. So I would like to introduce the topic today because it's really near and dear to my heart, as well as everyone working in product management. The main thing that I think is so difficult, is so challenging for our career, is our job is to understand or to navigate through the uncertainty. What I mean by that is there are so many unknowns around us. We don't know what the competitor is doing. We don't really exactly know what the users need. And we have to answer that question, because really the point of making our product works is really to bring what the customer needs to reality. But how do we know? How do we answer those questions? How do we make the big bets? How do we make sure that our bets are going to yield business result, as well as product success in the future? There are so many unknowns, and how do we discover those answers to the unknown is really difficult. But today, what we are here today is to listen from Chị Ha and her experience, and really ask ourselves, how do we ask those questions strategically, and how do we build a framework? And so it's my honor to introduce Ms. Ha to be our guest speaker with us today. And Ms. Ha, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And please take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Sunny and team, to invite me to this event. I've given this talk before, or at least parts of it, at a meetup in Boston. So just a little bit about me, as Sunny has mentioned. I am a director of discovery products at Pluralsight. It's an e-learning platform. The other thing that's unique about my position, I think, is that I've had the opportunity to build a team from scratch, build a product from scratch, and it's a data product at that. I've also managed engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, product managers, designers. All of those different disciplines report to me. So that has provided me a different perspective of how to build products also. And I have to say that I'm probably the dumbest person on my team. My role is to ask good questions and then empower my team to find the answers. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, so this here is some members of the team. And I wanted to just give a little bit of an introduction to this talk. This is actually not a process, really. It's more like a way of thinking about how to approach problems. I always say that a good product manager is one who asks really good questions. So this is really a framework about how to approach problem solving. All right, so let's start from the beginning. What is product management? When you interview product managers, you realize that they come from many different disciplines. We have product managers who come from a software engineering background. We have people like me who come from UX. You have business people. So they all come from many different backgrounds. But what is product management? Product management is a way of finding a differentiated solution, and what I call the bet. You're trying to find the bet to answer the business opportunity. So the reason why I call it a bet is that if you think about the product as a bet, what you're always trying to do is you're trying to de-risk the bet to have a better return on your investment so you can have a good business outcome. All right, so product management is really about asking really good questions. So a good product team, and I call a product team a team that's made up of multiple disciplines. A good product team is a team that works together, collaborate to ask really good questions. And we ask so many questions every single day. The question I always ask when I see startups or people who build new products all the time is, so what? Why does it matter? Why does the user care? And do they care enough to pay for it? So what is a big question for me. And then the day-to-day question you ask is, what's first? What do you build first? And what's next? All right, so when I think about the kinds of questions that I ask, or the kinds of problems that we solve when we build products, I usually think about it in these terms. You're either going to be solving utility problems or a value problem. Utility is this thing you're building useful, or does it have value? The other side of it is that you're always improving something. Is this, are you improving the usability of something? And then are you optimizing something? So this is a very simplistic way of boiling down the kinds of questions you ask. But in reality, it's a little bit more nuanced. So when you think about questions about utility and value, what are you really asking? The kinds of questions you ask are like, when and why is this useful? How does it meet the customer's needs or motivation? I crossed out needs mainly because in my experience, it's more powerful to build a product that meets the user's motivation than the user's needs. That requires a little more sophisticated user experience designer who can kind of chase after that, and more innovative thinker to chase after motivation versus need. And then why would users be willing to do things this way versus an alternative way? So a lot of times when you see teams start to ideate on product ideas, they just basically pitch a concept, but they're not really asking the question of like, why does the user prefer this way of doing things? Why would they pay for this over another way? That might be the divergent approach. And then the last part is, does it stick? Does it matter? That means like, will users return to it? Will users continue to use it? Will they pay for it? Paying for it means that the product matters. So these kind of questions are really about desirability, motivation, and then you innovate based on the psychology. So these kind of questions tend to be qualitative in nature. You can't really answer these questions quantitatively.
Chị Hà, sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind turning on your camera so we can see you?
Yeah, 1 second. The reason why I didn't turn it on was because I'm kind of sometimes refer to my notes. Okay, 1 second. Let me get my thing in order. Okay, so let's talk about context of use really quick. So when I always bring this slide up, this is actually came from the first deck I presented probably 5 years ago or 6 years ago at the University of Washington. So context of use is really important. When you start to ideate on a concept, when you start probing people on a problem, what you're trying to get at when you're trying to craft a point of view around a product, what you're trying to get at is you're trying to define the context of use. And a lot of product managers miss this. I think this is something that UX is really good at. When you define a context of use, the product changes, right? If you look at all of these products, they all heat up water. But the context of use is different. And when you change the context of use, what happens is that you change the fundamental technology of the product, you change how the users engage with the product, and you change the point of view of the product. So this is really, really important because if this is a physical product, but if you apply it to software products, the information architecture and the innovation of the product changes completely, and how you approach it completely changes. So context of use is very, very important. Okay, so questions about optimization. So we talked already about the questions about utility and value. The questions about optimization are really about, you have to ask yourself, like, what is it you're optimizing? What is it you're improving, right? One of the things you're improving is that you're trying to make the product easier to use, or you're tuning it. You're tuning how much more is it engaging, how much more is it relevant, etc. How much more efficient it is, and then or you might just want to improve it for a certain segment of users, for whom and when and how long. And then you might be optimizing to kind of what we call solve the problem of the leaky bucket, which is users coming in, but they're falling off. Where are they falling off? So these are optimization kinds of questions. And these tend to be quantitative in nature. So a lot of teams, they have this, a lot of software teams who think they already know what the problem is. They skip the qualitative part and they go directly to build. And I always say that quantitative data only tells you how deep or how wide your hole is, but it doesn't tell you if you dug the wrong hole. In other words, if you build a product without really asking questions of the customers, you really don't understand the context of use. So you're just kind of like, always digging the hole bigger or wider, but you don't really know if you got the wrong hole. All right, so let's dig into the high-level framework. I gotta stop here and just say that what I'm presenting to you today is not new. It's actually it's very gleaned from my experience working in UX and lean methodology. But the emphasis here is really on tying those things together and thinking about the behavior in the experience. And basically what we're trying to do is that identify the behavior as the trigger that produce a certain outcome. So the reason why I put this graphic up here is that this is how I think about software a lot of the time. You have a lot of things that tie together and that produce a certain outcome. And as a product manager, you might own just that wheel in the middle, and you're trying to optimize that wheel to get to some kind of outcome. And usually what you're doing is that you're building that wheel, but you're trying to get the user to do something so the wheel would turn faster. That's a very simplistic way of thinking about it, but I'm always focused on the user behavior. So we're going to first talk about hypotheses for crafting hypotheses for utility and value. This is the beginning when you're kind of shaping your product. So the hypotheses for value and utility usually have embedded within them questions about user trade-offs and motivation. So let's see some examples of that. So an example of hypothesis for value utility might be something like, engaging with AI-generated playlists will lead to more engagement than browsing because users will continuously discover and consume content by accidentally bumping into them. So this is the hypothesis I pull from something like Spotify. There are two different models. One is that you might be, when you go to Spotify, you usually are presented with playlists, and you can kind of just meander those playlists forever as it understands your taste and interest and listening preferences, and then you just go on forever. The other model, which is like previously before we had Spotify, we had things like iTunes, which is a lot of browsing, a lot of utility, basically a lot of controls. So this is the hypothesis for Spotify. This one is actually a hypothesis that we kind of used at GoPro when we were trying to build a music selection experience to help users to find music for their videos. So the hypothesis is when users are trying to find music for content creation, such as when they're creating a video or podcast, users will prefer a utility-focused experience to customize audio clips over a browsing experience that's focused on listening. So a lot of times when you talk to people about finding music, the thing they think about immediately is Spotify because that's what they're used to. But actually, the mental model of trying to find music to match, as like something to use for a video or a podcast is very different. So I brought up this example just to explain. This is SoundCloud. It's a music discovery platform, and as you can see, there's some similarities in how it's organized, like Spotify. And basically, people who create music can go and upload their tracks on here, and they can either offer it for free or they can sell it. Other people can download it to use. And then this is the second page where you can kind of see the tracks. And over here, you can download it for free, right? So this is SoundCloud. This is another app. I don't remember what the name, but because I did this a while back, but it reminded me of something we did at GoPro. So this app has a very similar business model. They also provide ways for users to find music for content creation. But the difference here is that you see that it offers it in different size clips. There's loops. And down here, you can edit that. You can kind of see the full track, or you can kind of select the different clips. And then so the general framing of this makes it feel like it's a utility. It's not a destination where you would go and just listen. This makes you feel like you're actually looking for something and finding the sizing of the clip that you want. There's more customization in there. The other thing that you see is that there's not this the tile view before where you see like the artist name and so on and so forth. So when you evaluate this, really, if you had a chance to use it, you realize that because it's in the list view, it allows you to sample more efficiently. And it's more of a service versus a destination. It provides more control for you to customize audio assets. And there's active participation from the user versus like you can actually sit back and just listen on the other one. So if you can distill these guiding principles out, you can kind of keep those as guiding principles to kind of as you're building the product moving forward. The reason why sampling behavior is key is because if you've ever talked to people who create videos, they only need to listen to the first 5 seconds of the piece of music to understand the mood that they want to create for the video. So let's dive into the framework a bit. I've showed that example to explain the trade-offs between the two different approaches. So when you start building a product, this is the kinds of activities that my team is engaged in. They might start with doing some data analysis. On the UX side, we might conduct different forms of research. We might look at existing market analysis. We might do a lot of design explorations to kind of ideate and think about ideas. Data scientists might be doing a bunch of prototypes for data science models. We might be doing some engineering prototypes or Wizard of Oz prototypes. So the idea here is that the entire team is engaged in ideation. And the ideation isn't to come to a solution. The ideation is to define the unknown unknowns and possibilities for the product and to articulate better ideas. And what you want to come out of it is to formulate some big hypotheses like the one I just showed you about Spotify and the music selection or discovery platform. I wanted to just talk about prototyping for a second. The images on the left shows like early iPhone prototypes. If you see the scroll wheel, the iPhone was created after the iPhone was created after the iPod, the music device, the music listening device. So that's why the wheel is shown on the left here. That was the UI that was prominent for Apple around that time. And then here's the early iOS concept over here. So these two prototypes were created and they're working prototype. They're ugly as shit, but they work. And when you engage with it, you can kind of ask additional questions. If you don't have a working prototype, you can't really ask good questions and you can't really get a feel for what the point of view of the product might be. This thing you see on the right that says taxonomy 11 expanded is really a prototype that was created by my data scientists when we were building a browse menu. The question I asked the team was that what I really want, how do we know what topic we should display on the browse menu? What I really want is that the topics displayed should be the topics users care mostly about and has good coverage. So data scientists went and they poked around, and they built this prototype for us. This is a photo from 5, maybe 6 years ago when I was at GoPro. The team built a video editing software. This is a fully functional prototype, and we built 2 different versions to get the users to make trade-offs. Basically, this is a photo of us sitting in a room watching the user create videos within 5 minutes. If you ever done any video editing, it takes you hours, if not days. So this is a working prototype. So after you've done all the explorations and you can formulate some point of view, some hypothesis, and then you want to design a qualitative experiment, right? And then from that you can form a hypothesis about value and utility. This little diamond box here is only one step, but if you ever worked in UX, you know that you might be performing multiple research sessions to kind of narrow down on the context, the mental model, and the motivation. So that step is really UX taking all of the ideation and then distilling it down to some core behavior that they can say, okay, the user really cares about this. This is the mental model, to really distill it down to the behaviors and the motivation of the user. And then from that, the question that you would ask is that, if you had to build this, how would you measure value? And then you would define also guiding principles from that. So if you remember the couple slides I showed earlier, where we talked about that music platform where the user behavior was that the users care about sampling more, and it's a utility. So when you think about those kind of guiding principles, it kind of governs how you make decisions. So this step is to kind of think about what are the guiding principles from the research that you've done here. And then the next step is to say which metric inform product success. So if you were to build this thing, hopefully by this time you have some ideation, some design concepts that you believe in, and you would ask yourself, well, if you had to define a measure, which measure would that be? Which user behavior would you measure to make this, to prove that this is successful? And then you might also ask yourself questions like, if I had to build this thing, what data do I want to capture? Which data would tell me the user's motivation and intention? In search, we actually capture user query. We capture, all the click points. We also capture auto suggest. So we ask ourselves, like, which of the actions that users take will inform their intention and motivation? And then what are the dimensions of optimization? Dimensions are like things like how long the user might spend to complete a task, or how often they come back, things like that. So the questions you ask here help you form a better picture of what the user is doing. But most importantly, what you want to get to is what is the key behavior in the experience that will prove that what you did is correct, or what you did is on the right track. And then from that, you define the quantitative experiment. So you define a hypothesis that links that behavior that you define, that basically this behavior is a core trigger to say that this thing that you built is successful. And then you test it, and I put prove with statistical significance. So on our team, we have a data analyst who works with us, and most of these steps right here is not done by the product manager alone. It's usually done with the product manager, the designer, some engineers, and data analysts. Usually the data analyst gets involved at this step over here, where they're helping us define the quantitative experiment. And then the length of how long you run the test is dependent on how much users are hitting it. You got to hit statistical significance. So the other caveat I have to mention here is that in order for you to run a quantitative test, it requires that you have traffic. You can't run this if you're a startup and you have no traffic. There's nothing to test. You can't get people in. There's nothing to measure. So the caveat to this is that in order to get to a quantitative test, you need traffic. So what if there's no existing baseline? So what I mean by this is that when you're building an experiment, you're always trying to test against something. You're always trying to define, like, this specific experiment is going to move this metric, or this existing experiment will improve some metric. So there's always a baseline that you're trying to lift. So what if there is no existing baseline?
So to help on these questions, we really want to ask our audience. So please go ahead and tune in the Slido link that you had earlier, and go ahead and answer your questions. What if there's no existing baseline metric? And choose among those options. Chị Ha will answer for us later on, but we're really curious to know, what's your point of view? What do you think would be a right answer here? I'm going to give a few moments for the audience to tune in the answer. But right now, Chị, do you have any guess which one would be the right answer? Which one would be not the right answer, but which one would be the majority of the audience selection? Just guess.
I don't know. This is something my team debate early on, so it's a trick question. That's all I can say.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I think we have pretty good number of answers here. So 70% of the audience actually choose the last option, which is define your success metric and observe. 32% or 30% of the audience choose the second option. And I see the number is still moving, but less than 5% of the audience choose the first option. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for participating in the poll. And I'm gonna turn it over back to Chị Ha, please. Please take it away.
Yeah, so we had this argument on my team. The reason why this came up was that when we build new features on search, or when we first built search, it was to replace an old experience. And we weren't sure what the metric should be, right? So when you're building something new and you have no baseline metric, you need to define your success metric to see is correct. But B is also correct. When you build anything new, you also want to find a do no harm metric. Usually, like I said before, in order for you to run a quantitative test, you need to have traffic. And so that also explains that if you have traffic, that means you have some way of measuring value. There's something in the platform, you're measuring something that says, whether it's like daily active user or retention or something, there's some metric you're already building. And when you're releasing something new, you don't want to do harm to those metrics. But C is actually the right answer. It's like you want to define the success metric and what that means. That becomes your new baseline. So C is correct, but B also needs to be correct, because you can define your baseline, but you want to make sure you're not harming anything else. So this is a trick question. So if there is no baseline, like I said, the minimal thing is that you must do no harm to the existing value of your business. And then if you're building something brand new, you need to define the threshold for success and failure. So say, for example, you're building something brand new and you have no other metric, and you're trying to, but you find that retention metric goes down, and you have to, basically the test shows that the new feature you're building or new product you're building is hurting your business metric, like some broad thing, like some bigger business metric, then you have to stop running that experiment, because you're hurting your business. Okay, so let's talk about optimization. The questions around optimization is, what is it that you're optimizing? How are you adding value, right? You have the mental model, you have the context of use, but how are you adding value? So sample hypothesis for optimization. One is improve usability. The new drop-down filters will enable users to discover more lesser known content types than the existing tabs. Improve relevance. This is something we do every single day. If the learn to rank algorithm is implemented, then the content engagement metric for users coming from search will improve. So that's how we measure relevance, is that we don't measure the click-throughs, we measure the content engagement. That means when a user finds something on search, they actually engage with it for a certain amount of time. This is a reverse way of running, doing something, of optimizing the experience. So, for example, if you're fixing something, or you're replacing an experience, and because the experience has so much complexity, another way of thinking about it is that you can remove complexity. So, say for example, you have a search that has 1,000 filters. You remove all those filters, and you find that there's no change in the baseline metric, or the NPS is still good, then you've proven that those features have no value, right? So you can do the reverse. Okay, so I did this just to show, maybe the difference between the workflow for asking questions about utility and value versus optimization. When you're trying to ask questions about utility and value, you go through all of these research initially to figure out the point of view, the mental model. But when you're asking questions about optimization, like the hypothesis I've kind of shown before, perhaps you don't really need to do all that. It just depends on how big the optimization is. But what you want to do is ask a question like, what do you expect this trigger or change to effect, right? What do you expect the user behavior to be? And then you just, you basically track that new behavior, and then you define the quantitative experiment hypothesis, and then you design the experiment, and then you test it. This is, once you've done this, it's pretty easy. The other thing I want to mention is that this is really expensive. The utility, going through this process, is really, really expensive. So actually, the thing that you must get right is actually this part here. If you kind of define the wrong problem to solve for the utility and value, then everything else you're optimizing. Everything else is, you're just kind of chasing yourself. Optimizing the wrong problem. So the further up the chain you are, the more expensive. The further up the chain that you get wrong, the more expensive things get. Because to kind of build a brand new experience, and it's basically rethinking your backend. So I want to give you another scenario. This is our search on Pluralsight. When we first built this, we had to do all this from scratch. So one of the things we added was this sidebar over here. So what the sidebar does, and it's pretty, there's nothing super innovative about it. Google has it. So the sidebar was created so that to kind of address the behavior or the motivation of when learners are trying to find something. Often when they can't articulate sometimes a thought or a concept that is top of mind. So when people type things into the search query, it's based on recall, right? You have to be able to bring it up from your memory or something you've known before. But if you don't know it before, we recommend things to you that might help you to wayfind in your research workflow. So here's the next poll. How do we define success for these recommendations on the search sidebar? What is the metric, right? What do we predict to happen? Content engagement metric remains the same, or content engagement metric increase? Sunny, are you gonna bring up the poll?
Yep. The poll is live, so everyone please go ahead and provide your answer. I have seen some of the answer already, but let's give us a moment for others to. All right. Now, getting into this question, it feels like to me it's like a teacher is asking a question. I feel nervous, Jake. And it reminds me about the moment where my manager or hiring manager, they suddenly they ask something. Hey, can you show me this? And what does it mean? Can you show me this metric? And show me your business. How is it successful? Those kind of questions are very nerve-wracking. So I'm glad we are doing a little bit of practicing today. And I think it's very interesting. When coming to when you mention about the questions when it to measure success, one of the things that the audience asks, and I'm hopeful that you can address later on, is what is that any difference between B2B and B2C? If there is a case, so then what's the difference? Yeah, so I'm gonna close the poll. I think we have very good participant right now. 90% of the audience choose the option number 2, which is the content engagement metric increase, and 10% choose the other one. Gee,
okay,
is that the right answer?
so I'll tell you what actually happened. Okay, so this is the template we use. Okay, we put the hypothesis. So every single time we design an experiment, we fill this out, right? And we actually fill this out probably 4 times each time. So I just want to show you, like, this is the process we go through. So what the hypothesis we want to test, basically how are you testing it, and then success metrics, and then which segment do we want to test, right? But let's talk about the A or B. Let me figure out how to go back. Okay, let's talk about the poll really quick. So initially, when we designed the experiment, we go, of course, we want the content engagement metric to increase, right? That was our hypothesis. But part of the experiment, when you design the experiment, you have to say, well, what happens if you fail? Basically, if content engagement metrics doesn't increase, does that mean that you remove that feature? And often for us, it means that, no, that didn't work. We're going to remove the feature. But so this is where it gets tricky. When we were conducting qualitative research, because you would think that building a sidebar is a no-brainer. But when we were building the sidebar, we actually had a bunch of other things we wanted to put in the right-hand side. The designer asked me, like, should we just build one thing and test that? And I said, no, there's a bunch of other questions you're asking here. And he said, what questions are those? And I said, first of all, you don't even know if the user even noticed anything on the right-hand side. Because we know from working in previous products that users don't look at the right-hand side. So then I said, so you have to put enough things on the right-hand side to make it feel like so that they can see it, one. And then we also looked at other search experiences and other page layouts. And then we ran qualitative testing, and we noticed we don't point to the right-hand side. But in qualitative testing, when users do notice the right-hand side, they usually tell us that they see the page differently. So the right-hand content actually provides value for how the user's trust in the whole experience of the result page, and also provides additional context for the search results. So that tells us that it provides value even if the user never clicks on it. So the answer actually is, as long as it doesn't erode any content engagement metric, that would be success. So the answer is actually A. So I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions about this. Is that okay, Sunny?
Yep. Yeah, we can do that. I'm going to ask the audience if you have any unclear, anything you want to clarify, please let us know. Otherwise, yes. I think we're good.
Yeah, that's actually the end of the presentation. I want to tell the audience that to actually more to the deck, but I don't have enough time to cover it today. So afterwards, like on this deck, I talk about the data that you get after you run the experiment and how you ask questions of the data you collect quantitatively. But yeah, I think we're open to questions now.
Great, thank you so much. I'm gonna give you a few seconds to grab your coffee and ready for the second half of the Q&A. So everyone, after you listen to Chiha's presentation and seeing all the examples, I know that you might have more questions. So take your time and put into the chat, or better way, you can also ask the question directly in Zoom. And we're going to invite you to turn on your camera when you ask the question so we can see you. And before you ask the question, maybe just do a quick intro of your name and what are you doing, so that we know more about the context. We're going to go to the questions that's submitted before the event first. And I think this is a very interesting question. So how you make or how you prioritize quant or qual? So by that I mean, how do you make a decision between those two? Is there any of those two better or more important than the other?
Yeah. When you're early on in the process, you need to prioritize qual. If you don't know, so qualitative research or qualitative testing gets at the why. Why are you building this? And like really gets at the context, like all of the nuance of the user's mental model, the intention. So at the beginning of the product, it's really important to have the qualitative questions answered. It just also depends on your product. So for example, like I gave the example of the sidebar. If we hadn't done the qualitative testing, we would not have known that the sidebar impacts how the user views a search result page, even without clicking on it. It just depends on the question you're trying to ask. The other thing I want to point out was that sometimes we build prototypes not for the solution, but to get the user to articulate something. So actually, when we were building prototypes to test the sidebar, I had the engineer build a fake prototype where we gave the user a bunch of different things on the right-hand side, and the user is able to move the individual components on the right-hand side. I told them we told them which of these are most important, and they can prioritize them. They can move the things up and down. So sometimes we design prototypes as a way to get the user to articulate something that they couldn't articulate had we not built the prototype. So it just depends on the questions you're asking. And that's why I said that a good product manager asks really good questions. So if I had not asked the question of, like, if the user doesn't click on anything on the right-hand side, does that mean that it failed? And that's why if we didn't do the qualitative test there, we would not know that that was important. So the answer is it depends, and that's a really hard thing to learn when it matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also to add into that, I think the product is a living object, right? So yeah. Even if you answer the questions, you still need to keep asking the questions and discover new questions to be asking. So I have a volunteer, Jennifer Hong Mai. She want to ask a question in Zoom. So Jennifer, please go ahead and unmute yourself and put the question to the speaker.
Yeah. Hi, Sunny. Hey, thank you. Sorry, I will not have my video turned on because, like it's Sunday, so I don't look very very ready to have my camera turned
No
on. So
worries.
apologize. Yeah, and hi, Miss Hat. Really appreciate your time today, and thank you for a lot of interesting sharing with us. I'm a product manager, and I work in the banking industry. So after hearing all your sharings about um, like quantitative and qualitative analysis and the testing, I have two questions actually. So number one is that can you elaborate a little bit more about the testing process? For example, you say that after we build the prototype, we will do some testing to see like how that prototype or how the changes will impact our customers. So how do we do that? Like if you can just elaborate a little bit more about the steps or some of the framework that you use, that would be great. And the second question is that, so one of the different things maybe between the software industry and the banking industry is that, so in the software industry, I feel like it's easier to, for example, release some changes into the into production, and we do the testing. But in the banking industry, it's much more like structural and regulatory than the other industry. So it's not like easy if I want to make some like incremental or small changes and release it to our our customers. So what is your advice if I want to do some testing, but I don't have a lot of like options to like just make the changes available to all our customers to see how they react to the changes? Yep, I appreciate like an insight that you can share with me. Thank you.
Yeah, the first question is a loaded question. Just so you know, I spent probably the first couple of years just giving talks about qualitative tests. And the qualitative test that most people are used to is that the designer creates some concept and they test, that. And so normally you have to ask yourself, like, what questions do you want to answer? And then what question do you want to answer? And then in terms of feasibility, do you have questions about feasibility? Which means like when you come up with ideas, how feasible is it to create, right? And usually we try to prototype on both sides so that we know what the user wants, but we also know the feasibility. So the process of qualitative research is that usually you have some idea. You have to do some interviews initially, either to voice the customer to understand, like, kind of the domain space. And then the next thing is that you ideate, and then this is really, really high level, but normally this is how it works in the UX side. And then there's some ideation, and the ideation isn't necessarily to come up with a solution. The ideation is to be able to get at what trade-off the users are willing to make. So, for example, like when you think about like the SoundCloud idea, is that the user's willing to make a trade-off because basically when you're trying to innovate, you have a new way of doing things, and then you have a baseline of doing things, and people are still stuck on that. So you're trying to figure out like which trade-offs users are willing to make to solve this problem, and then they're willing to pay for it. So all of your research is going to be around figuring out like what is the nuance of that workflow, why is it better than the old one, which like how do you prove that is going to be of value to the user, how many users, which segment it is. So all that research is basically you have to ideate, and then you have to test against that market and identify who those people are. The question around the banking question, which is basically a specialized market. That's a tough question because the framework that I just provide is very much tied to lean methodology, which is we iterate in small increments and continuously iterate, and then so we can tune the experience. The kind of domain you're explaining is really specialized and maybe doesn't lend itself to lean, because basically if you're running some small thing, it's detrimental to the experience. So it's more of probably a more waterfall kind of approach. So from that point of view, I would, from talking to other companies, normally what they would do is they would build a list of subject matter experts. And then the subject matter experts are the ones who provide the input for whatever research that you're running or whatever experience you're changing. So then you can use that. But if you're building something like that, it's very difficult to run it quantitatively. You can still collect quantitative data, but you can't experiment on people because it might be detrimental to your baseline metric, right? You might be hitting legal problems or whatever. So so that's the best I can do, because I don't really work in that space. Did you have a follow-up on that? I don't know if I've seen that to happen, but I don't know if that's that's the only thing I could think of from talking to other people.
Yep. Thank you for sharing those information. And I mean, like you hit the correct point here. So to your point, the banking industry is very highly regulated. So anything that if that is customer-facing materials, disclosures or something, or any changes that may impact customers, we need to talk with legal and compliance to ensure that legal and compliance are comfortable with that, and we don't have a lot of room to like make changes like every week or every month or something like that. But it like some changes, like if we make a change, we don't want to like make another change in maybe next 6 months or a year or like for many years. So you're absolutely right there. So I mean, yeah, maybe that is just like something very specific to the banking industry that we need to deal with. And yeah, you're right. Like normally when we want to make any changes, we need to like vet it very, very like thoroughly to make sure that like everyone is like feel very comfortable with that. Yep. So really appreciate what you have shared from your experience. I mean, like I learned a lot about like the other industries, how I mean, like in the software industry or the industry that you work in, to see like how you guys do the testing and make changes to the products. So we appreciate your time and all you have shared with us.
Yeah, the thing
Thank you, Jennifer.
The thing that's valuable about that process is that even if you don't work in the software industry or you don't work lean, it's helpful to think about it that way. Because if you start to think about it that way at the conception of the idea, then you have a more empirical way of building products. You're not just like coming with a concept, you're thinking at the very start of how you might prove this out and how you might measure success. So I think that's a very powerful way of building products.
Let's move on to the other questions in the chat. So it's a very interesting question. As a product manager, how much of your time is allocating for research? And if you are about to ask for a dedicated research team member, how would you convince your manager? If, let's say, you don't have research allocated for you.
So that's interesting, because when I worked at GoPro, we had an allocated researcher. When I came to Pluralsight, everyone was expected to do research. So on my team, I would argue that everyone is a researcher, from the engineer all the way to the designer. And I'm not just talking about like interviewing customers. For example, I had questions around user behavior in terms of user intent. And so I asked a data analyst and an engineer, and they dug up through the data and they compiled the report for me. And then they even provide the insight. They said, if you look at the top queries, the users are really looking for this, that kind of stuff, right? Or they're looking at like when users are entering this in, what they really mean by that. So what I'm saying is that everybody can participate in research in different ways. Research isn't always talking to customers. Research is really asking questions and figuring out how to find the answer. So on my team, I actually think it's better that we didn't have a researcher because everybody is really focused on asking good questions.
Awesome. We have a few follow-up questions around conducting qualitative and quantitative tests. Specifically, Vivian has a question about how much traffic is the minimum traffic you need for quantitative research, and similar for how many users is the minimum for qualitative research. Do you have any advice on this?
On the quantitative side, I actually don't know. On the quantitative side, it's something, the way that I normally do it is we work with a data analyst, and the data analyst tells us, like, he projects that based on the traffic we have, how long we need to run the experiment and when do we reach statistical significance. So we actually work with data analysts on that. So I don't really know the number. There's a formula he uses. On the qualitative side, usually I think the industry recommendation is that you get about 10 users. And then this is like in the past, what I've done is that you get about 10 users. And usually, you know, if you hit more than 5 and you start to see a pattern, then you have signal. So the way I think about qualitative research has changed. I use qualitative research as not truth, but as like just a signal to kind of give me some confidence in the hypothesis going into the quantitative research. So sometimes, like when we have a feature, not such a huge feature, but you know, a good enough feature where I feel, okay, this is a big enough change, and I need some confidence. I'll run the qualitative research, and we start getting like a pattern after 5 people. And I actually tell my designer to do that really quick, like do the qualitative research. It should take you no more than a week or 2 weeks to get people in, get some signals, and then if you get a good gut feeling on that, just run the quantitative research to get to the result as fast as possible quantitatively.
Awesome. And a lot of people ask us this question, and I think it's useful for many of us. Do you advise some sort of resources that we should continue reading on about this topic, like books or podcasts or whatever that is that you found useful?
Oh my God, this is a terrible question. So I can't really, mainly because I don't read anything. Everything I do, I've learned by doing. There's some really good people I follow online. John Cutler is somebody I follow. I think he manages product also. He's a director level at Amplitude. So I follow him quite a bit. Steve Portico is another person I follow for quite some time. He's a researcher. But a lot of my methods I learned from building Wizard of Oz prototypes or working with emergent tech at GoPro in terms of qualitative research. So I'm sorry, but people always ask me for books and I never read anything. So
yeah, learning by doing is always the top when it comes to PM, because the real goal is very, very challenging and so many different scenarios can come up. But if you don't mind, we can get the names that you just mentioned and we can follow up with the audience later on. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I would like to invite people in Zoom. Do you have any questions that you want to raise to Shiha? Please go ahead and unmute yourself. All right. Okay, so we can move to another questions here. Some people are very curious about, conducting research at a startup And you mentioned that there aren't many. If there is no traffic and there's no research, how do we go about solving that problem of the chicken and egg problem where you don't have a lot of data, but how do you go about finding out insights to build your product?
So I've been part of a startup before, and you can only do qualitative research. I think if you break down the problem of building product and building business, it's like you said, it's chicken and egg thing. So initially, what you're really struggling with is if you solve the right problem, and then you're also struggling with growth. You have no growth at the beginning. So what startups do initially in order to get to growth, if they either build business development, they have business development strategies to get more users. For example, in the early days of LinkedIn, I've heard that LinkedIn had to partner with Microsoft in order to get users into LinkedIn initially. So there's a lot of these business strategies that are outside of product. They're related to product, but they're outside of product. But that is a growth strategy. It's a way to grow your audience. If you talk to new business owners, like people who build, try to sell beauty products online, or people try to get people to get onto their platform to buy the beauty products, they have strategies like getting influencers on board to grow their audience. So I think there's two different problems. One is that the problem of are you building the right thing and you need to test it? And the other problem is that how do you grow your audience and how do you get your business off the ground kind of thing. So those I think are both marketing and business development problems that you need to work with those people. You can't solve that by yourself.
Great. So this is a question related to your career journey. A lot of people are curious about how you make the switch from UX to PM, and what advice do you give for people who have similar background?
I always say that research is the gateway drug into product management. So when I was at GoPro, I was a UX designer, but I was working on a lot of emergent tech. So they are intrinsically research focused, R&D focused. We're also working with technology that people have never used before, or they don't have a mental model for it, or so things that are completely blue sky. So when I started working on that, and then those initiatives actually became the core strategy for all software. So I started to attend all of these product manager meetings. I was helping them build roadmaps. And all the case studies were around, defining the right problem to solve and proving out innovation. So that experience kind of provided me the foundation into product management. When I came to Pluralsight, I kind of interviewed as a fluke. I was like, oh, this company also does things with video. And so I applied for a UX job and I presented my case study, how I defined the problem, how we built, with the last prototypes, how we working with, basically no users, but trying to, prove out a concept and basically innovation for the company. And when I presented that, the hiring manager said, "You shouldn't be a designer. You should be a product manager." And that was, the rest is history.
Follow up on that. When you make the switch to PM, what other, I would say, failure or early failure or mistakes that you have made, and you maybe when you look back in your journey, what skills you think typically UX designer or people who focus on research without a background PM would typically make? What are the skills that they need to transition successfully into PM?
That's a tough question. I didn't feel like I made any mistakes. That sounds like really arrogant, but I just felt like we had a lot of hurdles to overcome, and I just picked the right partners to help me overcome them. I think the mistake that PMs make, the mistake that I see most often, let's put it that way, is that I think a lot of PMs take orders. Like leadership has some idea, and PMs just take orders. They're like, here's an idea, go prove it out, go build it out. That always fails. What PM should do really when they get something like that is to use that as a hypothesis. And if a leader says, go build this, what they should do is think about that opportunity as an investment. Like when you start a startup, a lot of times your first ideas are wrong. So when you talk to investors will say that they invest in the people and not so much the ideas, because ideas will change. Products will pivot, but you're investing in a team. So when somebody asks you to go work on something, take it with a grain of salt and test out that hypothesis, but use that as an investment. Think about it as an investment to kind of figure out what you really want to build. The other competency that I see a lot of PMs missing, they just don't have it, is information architecture, which is understanding system thinking, how things connect to each other. And so they make the wrong bets, because sometimes if you have the right idea, but you don't think about it from a system point of view. So sometimes I get my team to build some small thing because I know that's going to get them to think about building that capability, so that when we want to build this other thing, we have that thinking, or we have that infrastructure in place to kind of build on top of. Those are kind of things that I feel is harder to teach PMs, like that system thinking of how things connect, what things to invest in. But you don't just go learn it. You kind of just have to understand. You have to look at the big picture from a system point of view. I don't know how to explain that, because I try to explain that many times and people don't understand it. When they see my team growing and they go, well, it's like I have no goal to, I have no ambition to, to own everything, but I build a good system, and good systems will scale. I don't know how to explain that, but that's something I see most PMs missing.
That's really great advice, G, and especially what hit me hard is about the leadership and how to balance the leadership expectation, because really PM is the one who is the representative for the customer inside the company, and you should always start with the customer in mind. So it's really, really important lesson to remember. Thank you so much for sharing, Jay. All right, we have a lot of other questions, but I think that the one thing that we also think a lot when it comes to in Vietnam market, for example, when I talk to PM or when I talk to people who are doing startups in Vietnam, there is a widespread need of research, but there isn't a school or any typical program that leading into that path. So how do you start? How do you start out and getting yourself familiar if you are early? Let's say you are just a student or you're just fresh graduate. How do you start out learning about this topic?
I would say that what I learned about user research all these years were wrong anyway. So I felt like I learned it from engineers, and I've learned it from our user research at GoPro. I think what it boils down to, if you don't have user research as a subject in schools, the way to learn it is just to look at how scientific experiments are run. What I've kind of presented is sort of like that. What you're trying to do always is everything you're working on, try to distill the research question from what you're building. A lot of people have problems with it. Sometimes you see teams doing this where they encounter a problem, they'll do a bunch of design work, and they can't articulate the assumptions from the design work. So if you don't have user research as a subject in schools, read read about how people run scientific experiments and think how you might apply that. Also read up on how psychology experiments are run. So it's really terrible, but I tend to think of sometimes building software like building the perfect mousetrap, which is like, sometimes when you read about experiments that were run before, like, when they put a mouse in like a puzzle and they try to get the mouse to do something. Sometimes I feel like building software is like that. And if you see where we are now with technology and what it's doing to society and division and all that, it's just because every software company is building software like a mousetrap. They're always optimizing for one thing without thinking in the bigger picture. But you need to think about that, because you need to think about what behavior you're amplifying to produce the outcome. So it all goes back to scientific thinking. Even if you're unaware of it, that's what's happening.
Great. I think it's a very interesting question that I would like to ask you next. What's a different in terms of research approach when it comes to agile versus waterfall? These are typical, two ways people building product right now. But your framework sounds to me more of a agile, like you keep iterating and you keep changing and modifying your approach. But is that applicable for waterfall? And can you comment about that?
Yeah, so the way that I run my team is that there's always an R&D track happening in parallel. Okay, so I think there's value in waterfall. I feel like when you work on waterfall, it's more like sprint zero. It's like there's like this whole step before you start building. There's that, there's the explorations and the diamond thing that I put into my into the framework that I have. It's like before agile kind of it's sort of like once you know something, you can start to just break it down, build in iterations, right? The waterfall process is that it's the idea that everything ahead of time and you're just going to build it. That never happens anyway. You never know everything. You don't understand the feasibility once you build it. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think that you have to understand like which question do you need to get answered so you can make the right bet. If you're working in waterfall, essentially you're gonna encounter some problems when you're starting to build a product because you don't know till you get there. So I feel like people working waterfall are kind of eluding themselves a bit because that's just how it works, right? You build a house. The house is waterfall. You build a house. I built a house before. You build a house. When you encounter something, you have to solve the problem, right? You can encounter, the plumbing didn't work that way, or you encounter some new constraint that you have to solve. But in terms of agile, I don't think that like I said, if you don't know the problem you're solving or why you're doing something, you're just going to continue solving the wrong problem without knowing it. So I don't know the answer to that question. I feel like we are imposing these processes without articulating the question or the problem we're trying to solve. In reality, it's actually like a combination of it. So I used to work with this other company that was an acquisition at GoPro, and I really admire the director who ran it because he was showing me his sprints, and he always had this one bottom row. And I said, "What's that bottom row?" And he's like, "That's our R&D thing. If we don't work on that, we're going to get stuck when we get to here later. We have to kind of work on that to build a foundation to continue to build forward without so that we don't block ourselves or to kind of unlock these unknown ahead of time."
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I think in reality, I I think more hardware company who typically using waterfall approach now actually having a hybrid approach of Agile and waterfall in some sense, although the development cycle is still very, very long, but they know how to at least combine with Agile to validate certain assumptions before they move forward, which make, at the end of the day, I think really about making a right bet and not wasting, resources on things that certainly would not add value to the users. So really, really challenging for those companies who follow the typical waterfall approach. But then I have seen that, more commonly, more and more companies are moving to adopt Agile. Even with my company, for example, we still do both, and for some project is still like few years life cycle, but still we are doing more of a like frequent check-in and research to really back up and iterate from a sample size of small users, but before we roll out. The thing is, it's a right mindset, or to your point, is really not one way or the other, but how do you find the best that works for your case?
Yeah, it just depends on the kind of unknowns you're trying to find answers to, right? At GoPro, I remember when they were building hardware, they used to, we had these beta tests where basically GoPro would bring like their people who are their athletes and people who are influencers and have them test out their gears. Like they would bring the team together. I attended a few of them. I went to a motocross kind of event where basically the team would bring out all the new gears and have these athletes test them out. So sometimes they would ask us, they go, hey, you want to come along and you want to test this thing when we're there? So that's not quite Agile, but that's as Agile as it gets if you're trying to build hardware. And the other thing that we used to do is that we used to have like these Frankenstein prototypes that they pass out to the team. So we would dog food them. GoPro used to have like these basically 2 hours a week, the company would allocate it to what we call GoPro Live It, time, where basically the team would get to go and do anything that is GoPro related. So we usually go out and people would go surfing, like our office was across from the beach, go surfing, or they would go biking or do whatever. People even like put their GoPros inside the oven to show like the cake was baking or whatever, or learn to storytelling and video edits. So that way the basically the internal team, who are all GoPro enthusiasts, can kind of test out new cameras, new devices, new features.
That is so cool. I actually really I wish that I am a part of the team and really just work with the athletes and just test out the product. It sounds very, very cool. And I also think that you talk about a point where for some product we want to test out with the early adopters, right? And these are influencers in the future. These are the most knowledgeable in the field, and that might give you maybe a handful of them, but that might give you a tons of insight that usually would late adopters or regular user we would typically not have. So this is a very, very interesting point.
I think it's important to point out that when you work on hardware, it's more of a bet, and when you work in software, it's more like a service. So I think more software is moving toward the service model. So that enables you to iterate. Whereas like when you build a hardware, that's a big bet. So I think that there's differences between those two things.
Awesome. Great. I think we are at time now. Thank you so much for Jiha. Thank you so much for your time and sharing with us today. Personally, I learned a whole lot. And also thank you so much, the audience, for participating from the beginning to now. We really appreciate your questions. To continue this conversation, please go ahead and join our Viet.UX-PM Facebook group as well as the Slack channel, so we can chat about this. We can still learn from each other about this topic. And also, please interact with us. Please let us know what other topics that on top of your mind and you would like to know more in the upcoming webinars. So with that, I'd like to close today. And again, thank you so much for your time and participation. The recording of this webinar would be followed and post on our Facebook group as well as YouTube channel. So tune in and follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch the next events or the previous event that we had. All right. So Chị from the bottom of our heart, I know that your time is so valuable, and it is your Sunday. This is really early your time. But is there any final words you would like to share to the audience?
Not really, but have a great weekend, what's left of it.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. And love to see your smile. Love to help you, welcome you back in the next event. So with that, thank you so much, and everyone enjoy. Bye.
Thank you very much, Jay, and talk to you soon.